So, what if I told you that the origins of human civilization and like the biblical myths of angels and even the global legends of giants all share the exact same root?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a lot.
Right. I mean, what if they all point back to an extinct, highly advanced cousin of humanity and a cataclysmic meteor strike that basically reset the clock on human progress?
Well, I mean, it is a massive sweeping premise. And the moment you introduce those specific elements, giants, angels, lost high-tech civilizations, you are immediately touching on some of the most controversial, heavily debated taboos in the entire archaeological world.
Yeah, which is exactly why we are diving straight into it today. Welcome to the deep dive. I am honestly so thrilled you are joining us for this, because our mission for today is to sift through a stack of source material that is guaranteed to completely shift how you look at the human family tree.
Absolutely.
We are unpacking the wild, totally paradigm-shifting claims of fringe history author Andrew Collins. We're looking specifically at his books, Denisovan Origins, The Cygnus Mystery, and From the Ashes of Angels.
Right, but we aren't just taking all of that at face value.
Right, exactly. To keep us tethered to reality, we are pairing all of his highly imaginative speculation with a very strict, no-nonsense archaeological review by Carl Fekens.
And, the tension between these sources is what makes this exploration so incredibly valuable. On one side, you have Collins taking incredibly recent cutting-edge genetic discoveries.
And he's weaving them into this grand, almost cinematic narrative of human history.
Yeah, totally cinematic. And then on the other side, you have Fekens representing mainstream archaeology, demanding rigorous adherence to the scientific method and warning against the dangers of what he calls mystery mongering.
Mystery mongering, I love that term. And our goal today is not to pick a fight, right? And it's certainly not to take sides politically or scientifically. We're going to explore the origins of civilization impartially. We're going to separate the hard archaeological facts from the speculative leaps.
Just to help you, the listener, understand the core arguments of both the fringe theories and mainstream science.
Because the truth is, the actual verified discoveries being made in paleoanthropology right now are, well, they're extraordinary enough on their own.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, we were living in a golden age of ancient DNA sequencing. The story of human evolution isn't a straight line anymore. It's a braided stream, and it is literally being rewritten every few years.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even touch the ideas of celestial maps or, cosmic rays or monumental architecture, we have to start at the biological foundation of Collins's entire theory.
Right, we have to look at the Denisovans.
Exactly, and to meet them, we have to travel to a very specific place. So picture this. You are in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. It is this freezing, rugged, completely unforgiving landscape. You step into a limestone cavern known as Denisova Cave.
Sounds cozy.
Right. And specifically, we need to focus on what archaeologists call Layer 11. This is a stratigraphic layer in the dirt dating back roughly 45,000 to 30,000 years ago.
And I just have to jump in here. Layer 11 is practically sacred ground in paleoanthropology at this point. The preservation in that specific microclimate is just astounding.
It really is, because the artifacts pulled from that dirt completely shattered our assumed timeline of human technological progress. I mean, Collins details some mind-blowing technology found here. For instance, they discovered 2 fragments of a bracelet, or, well, more like a bangle.
Made of green stone, right?
Yeah, it's carved from a green stone called chlorite. And what's crazy isn't just the aesthetic choice of a green polished stone, it's that there's a hole drilled straight through it.
And we have to look really closely at the mechanics of that hole. When scientists analyzed the interior striations of that drilled hole under high-powered microscopes, they found that the feed rate of the drill, the speed at which the tool was spinning to cut through the stone, was incredibly fast.
Like faster than you could do by hand.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The friction and rotational stability required to create that bore suggests something comparable to a modern-day lathe.
Wait, so we are talking about mechanical engineering 40,000 years ago?
Yeah.
They weren't just twisting a sharp rock back and forth with their finger.
Exactly. They would have needed a standing drill mechanism. Yeah. Think of a bow drill, where a string is wrapped around a spindle, and moving the bow back and forth creates this high-speed, stable rotation.
Wow.
Combine that with an abrasive, like fine quartz sand, and you can bore through hard stone. The mechanical knowledge required to construct that apparatus and to maintain the spindle stability so the chlorite doesn't just shatter into a million pieces.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's a level of sophistication we traditionally did not assign to archaic humans in the Paleolithic.
And the technological leaps in Layer 11 don't stop there. They found the world's oldest tailored clothing needles. Now, if you are surviving the Pleistocene epoch in the Altai Mountains, you can't just drape a mammoth hide over your shoulders and expect to survive the winter.
No, you would freeze to death. You need thermal dynamics. You need to trap heat against the body.
Right. And to make fitted garments, you need needles with eyelets fine enough to thread animal sinew through. It allows you to measure, cut, and sew complex multi-layered clothing.
It's actual tailoring.
Yes. They also found a piece of a woolly mammoth ivory tiara. Collins refers to it as a shaman's Alice band. It was designed with specific notches to have things dangling from it, maybe feathers or bone beads. It indicates a society that cares deeply about symbolic adornment, social hierarchy.
They also found red ochre carved into a precise pencil shape, suggesting drawing or deliberate symbolic marking on hides or cave walls.
Yes, the art. And perhaps most beautiful of all, the oldest confirmed musical instruments. They found fragments of flutes or maybe whistles made from the bones of swans and geese.
Which is brilliant because bird bones are naturally hollow to aid in flight. The acoustic properties are perfect for music.
But you still have to carefully remove the internal marrow lattice, right? And drill precise finger holes and calculate the acoustics to produce distinct tones. It was likely a pentatonic scale. So you have this picture of a society 40,000 years ago wearing polished green stone jewelry, sewing layered thermal clothes, wearing ivory headbands, playing music, and creating art.
It's breathtaking. And Collins expands this technological prowess geographically, too. He points to a site called Tolbur in Mongolia, where archaeologists found a highly advanced stone tool manufacturing technique known as pressure flaking.
And this isn't just like picking up a rock and bashing it against another rock to get a sharp edge, right?
Not at all. Bashing rocks is percussion flaking. Pressure flaking is a massive leap in material science. It utilizes the natural elasticity of materials like flint or obsidian.
So how does it work?
Well, instead of striking the stone, you use a specialized tool, often the tine of an antler or a really dense piece of bone, to apply intense concentrated kinetic force directly against the edge of the stone. You press until a very specific razor-thin flake shears off.
Wow.
Yeah, it allows you to create incredibly sharp, perfectly symmetrical, refined blades, like those beautiful laurel leaf spear points.
And Collins argues that this pressure flaking technology spread from Mongolia westward into Europe. And he says the people handing down this knowledge, the actual teachers of this technology, were the Denisovans.
And the key implication there is cultural transmission. Pressure flaking is not something a hominin just figures out by accidentally dropping a rock.
Right, you can't just stumble into that.
Exactly. It requires a master and an apprentice. It requires demonstration, patience, and likely complex language. Collins paints the Denisovans as this incredibly advanced, high-tech cousin of ours, acting as the technological benefactors of the Stone Age.
Which brings us to the physical evidence of their biology. And this is where Collins's narrative takes a very literal giant leap. For a long time, the only physical proof we had of the Denisovans was a tiny fragment of a pinky finger bone, just a distal phalanx discovered in 2008.
And from that tiny piece of bone, geneticists managed to extract and sequence their entire genome, which is a miracle of modern science.
It is. But then they started finding teeth. And Collins builds a massive foundational pillar of his theory out of these teeth. They found molars in the Denisova cave that are just biologically enormous.
The scientific term is megadontia. Paleoanthropologist Ben Sfiola famously examined one of these specimens and referred to it as a, quote, giant tooth from a rather big individual.
A giant tooth?
Yeah, the chewing surface is essentially twice the size of a standard modern human molar, with these massive splayed roots.
They also found skull fragments in 2016 that are incredibly thick. And Collins takes this specific osteological data, the giant teeth in the thick cranial vault, and he extrapolates a full-body morphology.
He essentially scales them up.
Right. He connects the Denisovans to another archaic hominin called Homo heidelbergensis, which fossil records show occasionally reached 7 feet tall. And then he points to the Tibetan Plateau, specifically the Baishia Karst cave, where an actual Denisovan mandible, a jawbone, was discovered.
And that jawbone discovery cannot be overstated in its importance. It proved that Denisovans weren't just isolated in a Siberian valley. They were thriving on the literal roof of the world in hypoxic, high-altitude environments.
And Collins ties this directly to ancient Tibetan oral traditions. The folklore and myths of the region say that long before modern humans arrived, Tibet was ruled by a race of giant ogres.
Oh, I see where he's going with this.
Yeah, he connects the dots. We found a Denisovan jawbone in Tibet. The Denisovans had giant teeth. Therefore, the Denisovans were the legendary 7-foot-tall giants of ancient myth. He even backs this up with the EPAS1 gene, which is a verified genetic fact.
The EPAS1 gene transfer is honestly one of the most spectacular pieces of verified paleogenetics we have.
Yeah.
Modern Tibetans inherited a specific allele of the EPAS1 gene directly from Denisovans.
Which helps them at high altitudes, right?
Right. In modern humans living at sea level, if you suddenly go to an extreme altitude, your body reacts to the lack of oxygen by overproducing red blood cells. This makes the blood dangerously thick, leading to altitude sickness or cardiac events.
But the Denisovan version of the gene stops that from happening.
Exactly. It regulates hemoglobin production, keeping the blood thin, while somehow optimizing the body's use of nitric oxide to dilate blood vessels. It allows Tibetans to thrive in environments with 40% less oxygen.
That's incredible.
It is absolute proof that our ancestors interbred with Denisovans and that genetic legacy actively aids human survival today.
But wait, I have to push back here. Isn't taking a massive tooth and a thick skull fragment and concluding we're dealing with a race of 7-foot mythological giants, a bit like finding a massive steering wheel buried in the dirt and assuming it must have belonged to a 20-foot-tall monster truck?
That is a fantastic analogy.
I mean, maybe it was just a regular-sized tractor with a really big steering wheel for leverage. How can Collins make that physical claim without the rest of the skeleton?
Well, your skepticism hits on a fundamental tension in paleoanthropology. Estimating an entire hominin's height, stature, and biomechanics exclusively from a molar or a mandible, without having long bones, specifically a femur or a tibia, is a massive speculative leap.
Because teeth don't naturally scale perfectly with body size, right?
Not at all. Megadontia is frequently an evolutionary adaptation to diet, not a marker of gigantism. If a population is chewing incredibly tough, fibrous roots or raw meat, or even processing hides with their teeth, natural selection favors massive, heavily enameled molars and thick jawbones to anchor the necessary muscle mass.
So big teeth just means a tough diet.
Exactly. It doesn't inherently mean the creature attached to the teeth was 7 feet tall. Paranthropus boisei had absolute unit-sized molars, but stood barely 4.5 feet tall. We have to remember that the desire to find the giants of myth is a very powerful human urge.
We want the myths to be real.
We do. It captures the imagination. But as rigorous observers, we have to separate the verified genetic legacy of things like EPAS1 from the mythological overlay.
Which naturally shifts our perspective to how the mainstream scientific community views all this. If Collins is building a towering narrative of high-tech giants, how does the established archaeological world respond?
Well, this is where Carl Fegans' critical review of Denisovan origins becomes incredibly useful.
Right. Fegans is a professional archaeologist, and his critique really grounds you, the listener, in objective reality.
Fegans' review serves as a classic example of archaeological boundary maintenance. He is looking at the exact same data points as Collins, the teeth, the cave layers, the genetics, but he's applying a strictly empirical, heavily critical lens.
He's not buying the giant theory.
Not at all. He emphasizes that we must let the data drive the narrative, not start with a narrative of giants and cherry-pick the data to support it.
And Fegans points out the very reality we just hit on. The physical evidence for Denisovans is staggeringly limited. We are talking about isolated teeth, a jawbone, and a finger bone. And here's a detail Fegans highlights that completely upends the giant theory.
Yes, the peaky bone.
Right, that famous Denisovan finger bone, the one that gave us the genome. Its physical morphology looks virtually identical to a modern human finger bone.
That is a crucial detail that often gets swept under the rug in fringe literature. When researchers first sequenced that phalanx, the assumption was that the Denisovans would look incredibly robust, hyper-archaic, much like classic Neanderthals.
But they didn't.
No, the physical morphology of that bone is remarkably gracile. It's modern. This immediately complicates the narrative that they were towering beast-like giants. Evolution is often a mosaic. You can have archaic jaws and modern-looking hands in the same population.
Fegans doesn't just argue about the bones, though. He goes after the methodology Collins uses, calling out some severe scientific flaws. For instance, he takes direct aim at Collins' heavy reliance on the cephalic index.
Oh, the cephalic index. This is where Fegans gets quite critical, and rightfully so. To a modern anthropologist, seeing the cephalic index used as a primary tracking metric is a massive red flag.
It's an old metric, right?
Very old. It is a 19th century metric used to categorize human populations based simply on the ratio of the maximum width of the head to its maximum length.
But skull shapes change all the time. Fegans essentially points out that this is an outdated, pseudoscientific way to measure human migration.
It has immense historical and scientific baggage. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was frequently weaponized to support racist taxonomies and the idea of biological determinism.
Yikes.
Yeah, today, physical anthropologists understand that cranial plasticity is incredibly high. Your skull shape is heavily influenced by your environment, your diet during childhood, and the masticatory stress of what you chew.
So if you change your diet, your head shape changes.
Over a few generations, yes. A population transitioning from tough, raw foods to soft, cooked agricultural grains will see a change in their cephalic index. It is not a reliable metric for tracing a specific genetic lineage across tens of thousands of years.
And Collins uses it anyway.
Fegans notes that Collins himself admits the cephalic index is outdated, but then proceeds to use it throughout the book to track the supposed migration of Denisovans descendants anyway.
It's like saying, look, I know phrenology is debunked, but let me read the bumps on your head to tell your genetic future anyway.
Exactly.
And the methodological leaps get even wilder when they get to the Solutrean hypothesis.
The Solutrean hypothesis is already highly controversial within mainstream archaeology. It suggests that people from the Solutrean culture in prehistoric Europe, known for their distinctive, finely crafted, leaf-shaped stone points, migrated to the Americas by traveling along the pack ice of the North Atlantic Ocean.
Predating the migration across the Bering Land Bridge.
Right.
And Collins takes that controversial theory and adds another layer, arguing that these Solutreans were actually Denisovans, or their direct descendants, arriving in the Americas by boat. Fegans has absolutely zero patience for this.
He really doesn't.
He accuses Collins of confusing basic genetics to force this narrative. Specifically, he points out that Collins treats haplogroup X2, which is found in modern Orkney populations in Scotland, and haplogroup X2A, which is found in ancient Native American populations, as the exact same genetic marker just to make his transatlantic migration theory fit.
And in paleogenetics, understanding haplogroups requires understanding the concept of a molecular clock. Haplogroups trace maternal lineages via mitochondrial DNA. Mutations occur at a relatively predictable rate.
So X2 and X2A aren't the same.
They are related, yes, but they are distinct subclades. They branched off from a common ancestor. To get from X2 to X2A requires a specific number of genetic mutations that take thousands of years to occur.
You can't just skip the mutations.
No, conflating them as the identical marker to prove a direct, sudden migration is a significant scientific error. It ignores the foundational mechanism of how we track time in genetics.
Fegans says this methodology is essentially like firing a shotgun at the side of a barn and then walking up and painting bullseyes around the bullet holes to prove your accuracy to the neighbors.
That's a very vivid way to put it.
You're taking fragmented data and forcing the target to match it. So, for you listening, how do we navigate this? On one hand, the Denisova cave findings, the drill speeds, the flutes, those are breathtaking realities. On the other, the methodology connecting them to global giants and transatlantic migrations seems deeply flawed. How do we appreciate the very real wonder of ancient DNA without falling into the trap of mystery mongering?
That is the tightrope walk of modern science communication. What's fascinating here is how the word Denisovan has essentially become a modern buzzword for fringe theorists. It functions much the same way the word quantum is used in New Age circles.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Because it is a relatively new discovery, and because the fossil record is so sparse, it becomes a blank canvas.
You can project whatever you want onto it. If there is an unexplained technological leap or a weird gap in the record, you just say, the Denisovans did it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It acts as a convenient gap filler. But the actual peer-reviewed science, the fact that multiple distinct hominin species coexisted, traded, interbred, and shared tools and vital survival genes, that is awe-inspiring enough.
It really is.
The human story is vastly more complicated and collaborative than we thought 20 years ago. We don't need the Denisovans to be mythological giants who single-handedly taught humanity everything in order for their story to be profound.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Keep our feet on the ground, follow the data. But Collins doesn't keep his feet on the ground. Having established his physical theory of the Denisovans, he moves entirely into the realm of cognition. He wants to explore how they thought.
Yes.
And this is where we bridge paleogenetics with ancient astronomy.
This is where the synthesis of disciplines becomes truly dizzying. He leaves traditional archaeology behind and moves into neurobiology and astrophysics.
You're not kidding. Collins looks at the Denisovan genome, and he claims they carried specific genetic markers that, in modern humans, are linked to autism. And he theorizes that this didn't make them disabled. Instead, it gave them savant abilities.
Specifically, he focuses on a rare savant ability known as calendar counting.
Right. Calendar counting is the ability to mentally calculate incredibly complex calendrical cycles, projecting the cycles of the sun, the moon, and eclipses thousands and thousands of years into the future or the past almost instantly.
It's an incredible cognitive feat.
He argues this is why ancient human cultures were so inexplicably obsessed with the sky, because they inherited this highly mathematical, autistic, savant brain structure directly from Denisovan interbreeding.
It's an incredibly bold cognitive theory, and he anchors this entire premise to a specific archaeological artifact from Siberia.
The Multisite. This is an excavation dating back 24,000 years. Archaeologists found a rectangular mammoth bone plate there, and it is covered in these dense, intricate spirals of dots and carved holes.
And Collins brings in the work of a Russian archaeologist named Anatoly Larchev.
Right. Larchev studied these spirals for years and claimed they aren't just decorative art. Larchev argues the precise number of dots in these spirals mathematically generates specific cosmic numbers.
Numbers like 54, 72, 108, 216, and 432.
Yes. And those specific numbers show up everywhere in ancient world mythologies, from Hindu yugas to Norse myths. They are deeply tied to the 72-year precessional cycle.
The precession of the equinoxes.
Now, tracking precession without telescopes or written records is an act of almost unimaginable observational rigor. The Earth's axis has a slow wobble. Because of that wobble, the background of stars we see at specific crucial times of the year, like the spring equinox, slowly shifts.
But it shifts incredibly slowly.
So slowly that it takes 72 years for the stars to move exactly 1 degree in the sky. That is a single degree of change across an entire human lifetime. And it takes roughly 26,000 years for the whole cycle to complete.
To notice that shift, track it, and mathematically predict it requires a generational dedication to astronomy that we rarely credit to Paleolithic hunter-gatherers.
And Collins is saying that a 24,000-year-old mammoth bone plate has these exact precessional numbers, 72, 108, 432, encoded in its spirals. He argues that the Denisovans, utilizing their neurodivergent savant minds, figured out the deep mechanics of the solar system and passed it down to us.
But the obvious question is, why were they so mathematically obsessed with the deep sky?
What were they looking at?
Exactly. This brings us to the core premise of Collins' other book, The Cygnus Mystery.
Right. So Collins proposes that around 17,000 years ago, humanity was physically altered by a bombardment of cosmic rays. And these cosmic rays were emitted from a specific binary star system called Cygnus X3, located in the constellation of Cygnus, the Swan.
And at that time in history, because of that 26,000-year precessional wobble we just talked about, the brightest star in Cygnus was aligned as our North Star, our pole star.
Meaning the entire visible night sky would have appeared to slowly revolve around the Swan.
Exactly. It would have been the focal point of the heavens.
And Collins is saying that subatomic particles, highly energetic cosmic rays shot out of this binary star system, penetrated the Earth's atmosphere, reached the humans living deep in cave systems, and actually mutated their DNA.
He claims this localized radiation burst physically accelerated human neurobiology and sparked the sudden, explosive rise of complex religion and art.
Okay, let's dissect the mechanics of this claim carefully.
Please.
Because I need help here. We are jumping from identifying a few fragmented genetic markers potentially linked to autism to claiming an extinct species had Rain Man-like abilities to mentally calculate deep space eclipse cycles, all while their DNA is being forcibly mutated by subatomic particles from a binary star.
It's a lot to take in.
Is this a brilliant multidisciplinary synthesis of genetics and astrophysics, or is this just an imaginative sci-fi script?
Well, it raises a profound question about how far we can stretch interdisciplinary data before it snaps. Let's look at the biology first. The idea of how different hominin species process the world cognitively is a genuinely fascinating scientific frontier. A Neanderthal brain's visual cortex was shaped differently than ours. it's highly likely they experience consciousness and sensory input differently.
Sure.
But linking localized genetic markers from a highly fragmented 40,000-year-old genome to highly specific advanced calendar counting requires an enormous leap of faith.
Because we don't even fully understand the genetics of autism in modern living humans who we can actively study.
Exactly. Autism is highly polygenic. It involves complex interactions between hundreds, possibly thousands, of genes and environmental factors. To look at an archaic genome and declare definitively produced calendar counting savants is stepping far outside the bounds of verifiable empirical genetics.
And what about the cosmic rays from Cygnus X3?
It is a biological fact that ionizing radiation, like cosmic rays, can cause genetic mutations. They interact with the DNA double helix, causing double-strand breaks that, when repaired imperfectly, lead to germline mutations. That is a basic engine of evolution.
Okay, so the mechanism is real.
Yes, but to claim that a specific burst from a specific star system directly caused a localized neurological leap that instantly created religion and art, there is simply no empirical evidence in the archaeological or genetic record to support a sudden mutation of that scale tied to a stellar event. It is a wonderfully creative narrative, but it lacks the mechanistic proof required by rigorous science.
But Collins argues that the proof isn't just hidden in our DNA. He argues it was recorded and written in stone. If the Denisovans had this cosmic obsession, and if they were mutated by Cygnus, Collins argues this astronomical knowledge didn't just vanish. It left a cultural footprint.
And he says we can see that exact footprint manifested in the world's oldest monumental architecture.
We are talking about Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, a megalithic site built roughly 11,800 years ago.
Right at the terminal end of the last ice age, coinciding exactly with what is known as the Younger Dryas boundary.
This was a period of sudden, extreme climate chaos, a massive drop in global temperatures, which many scientists and geologists now believe was triggered by a fragmented comet impact. And Collins says, look at the staggering limestone pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Specifically, look at Pillar 18 in Enclosure D.
Pillar 18 is an anthropomorphic pillar. It isn't just a block of stone. It is subtly shaped to represent a human being with arms carved down the sides.
Yes, and carved into the midsection of the stone is what looks like a belt with a prominent buckle. Collins claims that buckle, shaped like a U or a crescent, is actually a representation of a comet. Below that belt buckle is a carving of a fox pelt acting as a loincloth.
The fox pelt is significant.
Very. Collins notes that globally, canines, foxes, wolves, coyotes are universal trickster figures in mythology. In many ancient shamanic traditions across the world, the trickster is the entity who pushes over the cosmic post, the pillar holding up the sky, thereby causing the apocalypse.
So he's saying Pillar 18 is a literal physical memorial to the comet impact that caused the Ice Age cataclysm.
Yes, and he builds on that astronomical interpretation heavily when he looks at Pillar 43, famously known in archaeology as the vulture stone.
This is the crux of his archaeoastronomy argument.
It is. The vulture stone is covered in various animal carvings. Down at the very bottom, there is a scorpion. Collins points to the work of independent archaeoastronomers who claim that this scorpion is a literal one-to-one representation of the constellation Scorpius. And if you run the astronomical software back and align that carved scorpion with exactly where the constellation Scorpius would have sat on the horizon in 9600 BC, the rest of the animals carved on the stone line up perfectly with the rest of the night sky,
turning the entire pillar into a prehistoric megalithic star map.
Precisely. But a map for what? Collins says it is a map for the soul's journey after death. On the vulture stone, there is a prominent carving of a headless human figure, and next to it, a large vulture playing with a human head.
And in Neolithic art, the head frequently represents the soul or the seat of consciousness.
Right. Collins argues that the art depicts the soul journeying toward the hole in the sky. The northern celestial pole, which, as we established earlier with his Cygnus theory, was guarded by the constellation of the Swan.
And this journey of the soul to a specific star motif isn't isolated to Turkey, is it?
Not at all, and that's what makes it so compelling. You see the exact same celestial geography in the Native American path of soul's belief, where the spirits of the dead are said to travel along the Milky Way until the star path splits, right at the constellation of Cygnus.
Wow.
You see it in ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh's soul journeys into the night sky to reach the goddess Nut for rebirth. And the cosmic womb of Nut aligns with Cygnus. He even connects it back to that 24,000-year-old Malta site in Siberia where they found those beautiful bone pendants shaped like flying swans.
So it's all connected.
He says this is all evidence of early global animism, representing the soul taking the physical form of a bird to fly to the Cygnus stargate.
It's an incredibly cohesive, deeply poetic narrative that ties together diverse global cultures.
It is, but here comes my pushback. It's poetic, yes. But the people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They were transitioning to agriculture, but they didn't have written language or metal tools. By looking at a carving of a scorpion and a vulture and definitively calling it an advanced, unified celestial map of the soul's journey to a specific binary star system, aren't we just projecting our own modern desire for deep universal meaning onto ancient art?
That is the perpetual danger of archaeoastronomy when it is applied without strict methodological caution. Humanity has an innate neurobiological drive for pattern recognition. We look at clouds and we see faces. We look at a random scattering of glowing gas in the night sky and we draw bears and hunters and swans. It's called pareidolia.
We connect dots that aren't inherently connected.
Exactly. Now, were ancient peoples master observers of the night sky? Unquestionably. Their very survival depended on tracking seasons, animal migrations, and weather patterns via the stars. But we must be incredibly careful not to mistake highly stylized, localized spiritual art for a universal cosmological map.
A scorpion might just be a scorpion.
A scorpion carved on a pillar might just be a scorpion because there were a lot of scorpions in the Anatolian landscape and they were daily visceral danger. A vulture might be carved because excarnation, the practice of leaving deceased bodies out for vultures to consume and clean the bones, was a verified common burial practice in that region. We don't need a unified field theory of Cygnus cosmic rays to explain why ancient people carved the birds and bugs they saw every day.
So we've gone from Denisovan mechanics to cosmic rays to Göbekli Tepe sky maps, but now here's where it gets really interesting, because the heavy focus on bird imagery at Göbekli Tepe leads Collins to his most controversial claim of all.
I know where this is going.
He claims that these ancient feather-wearing shamans from the Göbekli Tepe era are the literal historical basis for the angels of the Bible.
And now we enter the highly charged realm of theology, intersecting with prehistory.
Let's talk about the Book of Enoch. It's an ancient Jewish apocalyptic text. It's not included in the standard canonical Bible for most denominations, but it was highly influential in Second Temple Judaism. It tells the story of 200 angels, known specifically as the Watchers, who descended to Earth, specifically landing at Mount Hermon.
And they were tasked with simply observing humanity, but they broke the divine rules.
Right. They lusted after human women, took wives, and birthed a hybrid race of ravenous giants called the Nephilim.
And crucially for Collins' theory, the Watchers also shared forbidden knowledge with humanity.
Yes. The Book of Enoch explicitly says the Watchers taught humans the secrets of civilization. They taught them how to work with metallurgy, how to forge swords and shields. They taught them astronomy and root cutting. They taught them how to extract antimony, specifically the mineral stibnite, to create cosmetics to beautify their eyelids.
They even taught them the secrets of performing abortions.
Collins looks at this text, strips away the supernatural theology, and says, this isn't a fairy tale about ethereal spirits with glowing halos. This is an encoded oral history of a highly advanced human culture passing on their technological and chemical secrets to a more primitive one.
He is essentially attempting to find a rational historical core buried inside mythological trauma.
Exactly. And he claims to have found the archaeological evidence of these angels. He points to a site called Zawi Kemi Shenidar, a cave complex in the Zagros Mountains of Kurdistan, dating to around 800 and 870 BC. Archaeologists excavating that cave found something completely bizarre: the remains of massive predatory birds, specifically bearded vultures and sea eagles, where the wings had been deliberately hacked off the bodies.
And next to these severed wings, they found exactly 15 goat skulls arranged in a deliberate manner.
The goat skulls provide a very specific, potent mythological link.
Because Collins connects the goat skulls directly to the biblical demon Azazel.
If you know the phrase scapegoat, it comes from the biblical ritual where the sins of the community were placed on a goat that was then sent into the wilderness for Azazel. And in the Book of Enoch, Azazel is named as one of the primary leaders of the fallen Watchers.
So Collins says the Watchers weren't angels with literal biological wings growing out of their backs. They were human shamans who physically wore ritual cloaks made of severed vulture wings and performed complex ceremonial magic utilizing goat skulls.
It is a fascinating reinterpretation of myth utilizing actual material culture from an archaeological dig. But he goes much further into their physical appearance, doesn't he?
He does, and this is where I think he completely loses a lot of readers.
He looks at another fragmentary text from the Dead Sea Scrolls called the Testament of Amram. In this text, it describes a watcher possessing a visage like a viper, a face like a snake. Collins tries to explain what a viper-faced human would actually look like in reality. And to do this, he uses the most wild, anachronistic analogy imaginable. He relates the facial features of the biblical watchers to the patrons of the 1990s Los Angeles nightclub, the Viper Room.
The club owned by Johnny Depp.
Yes. Collins literally writes that jazz musicians and drug users who hung out in those types of underground clubs would often have emaciated, hollowed-out faces and constantly squinted eyes from smoking marijuana and staying up all night. He suggests the watcher shamans looked this exact way. Gaunt, pallid, squinting, viper-like, because they were engaged in extreme ascetic practices, fasting for days, and entering drug-induced shamanic trances.
That is, well, an incredibly difficult logical leap to justify scientifically.
And to back up this reptilian look, he points to clay figurines excavated from the Ubaid culture in Mesopotamia, dating to around 5000 BC. These are physical figurines that literally depict women with elongated lizard-like heads, cocky bean-shaped eyes, holding babies that also have stark reptilian faces.
Right, the Ubaid lizard figures.
So here's my pushback. Wait, Collins is using Johnny Depp's Viper Room from the 1990s to logically explain the facial features of biblical angels. That is objectively wild. And looking at an abstract clay statue of a lizard baby and concluding it's a literal anatomical portrait of a viper-faced human race. Isn't that taking ancient art way too literally?
It is the absolute pinnacle of taking symbolic art too literally. The Viper Room connection is a prime example of a rhetorical trick often used in fringe theory, stitching together a completely unrelated modern cultural anecdote with an obscure ancient text to create a false sense of modern plausibility.
It just sounds good on paper.
Right. As for the Ubaid figurines, mainstream archaeologists widely consider these to be representations of chonic deities, gods of the earth and the underworld, where snakes reside. Or they're simply highly stylized symbolic art. To look at a clay lizard and say, therefore, a race of snake-faced humans existed, ignores everything we understand about how ancient humans utilized metaphor, exaggeration, and symbolism in their art.
We don't look at Picasso's Cubist paintings and assume humans living in the 1930s biologically had both eyes on the same side of their head.
That is a perfect way to frame it.
But Collins isn't quite done building his timeline. If these watcher shamans jump-started civilization in the mountains of Kurdistan, teaching metallurgy and astronomy, where did they originally come from? Why did they possess this advanced knowledge while others didn't?
This leads to the final piece of his puzzle, the Egyptian cataclysm and the underground cities.
Collins traces these watchers back to what he calls an elder culture that fled a massive global apocalypse.
And we are brought right back to the catastrophic end of the Ice Age.
We are back to the Younger Dryas impact event. Collins echoes several other alternative historians by turning his focus to the Great Sphinx of Egypt. Mainstream Egyptology firmly dates the Sphinx to around 2500 BC during the reign of Khafre. Collins argues it was built thousands of years earlier, around 10,500 BC, during the astronomical age of Leo.
He bases this largely on the fact that the Sphinx is shaped like a lion and on a highly controversial geological theory that claims the deep vertical erosion fissures on the Sphinx enclosure were caused by thousands of years of heavy torrential rain, not the wind and sand of the Sahara.
This is commonly known as the water weathering hypothesis, and he ties this geological claim to the Egyptian myth of Sekhmet, the fierce, bloodthirsty lion goddess who unleashed fire upon the earth to destroy a rebellious humanity. Collins says Sekhmet's fire isn't just a myth, it is a literal allegory for the meteor impacts, the burning atmosphere, and the devastating climate chaos at the end of the Ice Age.
So this advanced elder culture living in Egypt realizes the world as they know it is ending.
Exactly. The Nile is massively flooding, the skies are raining fire, the climate is collapsing, so they flee. They migrate away from the destruction, up into the Zagros Mountains of Kurdistan, bringing their advanced, hoarded knowledge of agriculture and astronomy with them. But the global environment is still incredibly hostile.
So to survive the harsh post-meteor impact conditions, the freezing temperatures and blocked-out sun, Collins says they mobilized and built massive underground cities.
He's referring to the subterranean complexes like Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, Turkey.
Yes, and Derinkuyu is an absolute marvel of engineering. It's an underground city carved directly into soft volcanic rock that goes down 36 distinct levels.
36 levels.
It is estimated it could hold up to 20,000 people, along with their livestock. It has complex ventilation shafts, fresh water wells, stables, communal kitchens, wine presses, and massive circular stone rolling doors designed to seal the tunnels from the outside.
Collins claims these complexes were built around 9000 BC by the fleeing elder culture as literal doomsday bunkers. He even points out that the strange, naturally eroded rock formations above ground in that specific region of Turkey are called by local villagers the fire chimneys of the Peri, and the Peri in local folklore are mythical fallen angels.
Tying the landscape itself all the way back to the Watchers.
Right. So looking at it all together, it sounds exactly like the plot of a sci-fi blockbuster. An advanced society fleeing environmental collapse to live in massive underground doomsday bunkers, eventually emerging wearing vulture wings to teach a primitive humanity how to rebuild the world. But mainstream geology vehemently denies the Sphinx is 12,000 years old.
And most historians and archaeologists date Derinkuyu much, much later, to the Phrygian era around 800 BC, or the early Christian era when people were fleeing religious persecution.
So are these stories of Sekhmet and fallen angels just powerful metaphors for survival, or a literal lost chapter of human history?
We have to contextualize the Younger Dryas impact theory to answer that. The idea that a fragmented comet struck the Earth roughly 12,800 years ago is no longer purely fringe. It is gaining serious, rigorous traction in mainstream science. We have physical evidence of global burn layers, nanodiamonds, and platinum spikes in ice cores. The climate undeniably went chaotic.
The humans living at that time absolutely experienced profound existential ecological trauma.
It was a very real apocalypse for the people living through it.
Exactly.
And we must ask, how do pre-literate societies record profound trauma? They do it through powerful storytelling and myth. Myths of world-ending floods, fires falling from the sky, and gods unleashing their wrath are found globally. The myth of Sekhmet perfectly encapsulates the terror of a violently changing climate.
But they don't have to be literal history.
But, and this is vital, we don't need the physical Sphinx to be 12,000 years old to validate that human trauma. Mainstream Egyptology rejects the water weathering hypothesis because the archaeological context of the entire Giza Plateau firmly places the Sphinx's construction in the Old Kingdom. As for Derinkuyu, while it is an undeniable architectural marvel, the physical artifacts found inside the lower levels align with much later historical periods.
To arbitrarily date it to 9000 BC is to stretch the physical evidence until it breaks.
Simply to make it fit the pre-written narrative of the elder culture. The myths are incredibly real, potent memories of trauma, but the literal physical timeline Collins constructs is fundamentally flawed.
So what does this all mean for us? We have gone on an absolutely dizzying multi-millennial journey today. We started with the very real hard science of Layer 11 in Denisova Cave, marveling at the mechanics of high-tech green chlorite bracelets and the pentatonic scales of bone flutes. We explored the molecular mechanisms of the EPAS1 altitude gene, and then we watched how those verified fragments of bone and stone were spun into a massive global web.
A web that included neurodivergent savants tracking deep space precessional eclipses, subatomic cosmic rays from Cygnus X3 violently mutating human DNA, and prehistoric megalithic star maps carved onto the limestone pillars of Göbekli Tepe.
We looked at the apocalyptic texts of the Book of Enoch and saw how severed vulture wings and goat skulls in a Kurdish cave were transformed into the biblical myth of the fallen angels, the Watchers. We even took a completely unexpected detour to Johnny Depp's Viper Room.
I am still reeling from that one.
And finally, we ended up deep in the subterranean doomsday bunkers of Turkey, fleeing the wrath of the lion goddess Sekhmet.
It truly is a testament to the sheer power of human imagination, but the profound imagination of our ancient ancestors who carved the vulture stone to make sense of their world, and the imagination of modern authors desperately trying to connect every single disparate dot in the ancient world into one unified theory.
We've seen how a few isolated fragments of a puzzle can spawn world-altering theories, and why it is so vitally important to have a methodological guide like Carl Fegan's to remind us of the archaeological reality.
And I think it leaves you with one final profound thought to mull over. Think about the highly abstract art we create today. Think about our complex metaphorical stories, our superhero movies, and the unique, unseen genetic quirks we all possess.
Okay.
If a civilization 10,000 years from now digs up the fragmented remnants of our modern world, if they find a shattered piece of a medical X-ray machine, or a distorted, faded piece of a movie poster depicting someone flying, what wild, sweeping myths will they invent about us? Will they use their scientific rigor to see us for who we truly are in all our messy, contradictory reality? Or would we inevitably become the magical giants and angels of their origin story?
That is an incredible thought to leave on, and a perfect reminder of how we interpret history matters so much. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the narrative, and we'll see you next time.